Chapter 54, Transportation. Section 3. Whatever advantages were supposed to pertain to a system of domestic punishment, it was opposed by formidable difficulties. To Bentham's system it was objected that it required a supervision practically unattainable. The enthusiasm, ability, and integrity of the projector, it was alleged, would be probably confined to himself. And although the better plan, while under his eye, it would prove of all the most dangerous and inefficient, when directed by the unskillful and corrupt, nor did it prevent the return of the offender to society, and thus a relapse into crime. The large preliminary outlay required to test the scheme of Bentham, which exceeded his first calculations, was urged against its trial, and its complicated details wearied the attention of the county magistrates. They preferred transportation and cheerfully resigned the offender to the good or ill fortune of his colonial career. These views were strengthened by the increasing aversion to capital punishments. To detain a criminal for life seemed cruel to himself, and to release him would be perilous to the community. His treatment while in bonds would vary with the temper of individuals entrusted with his punishment. This Bentham himself confessed. He observed, different tempers prescribe different measures of security and indulgence. Some forget that a convict in prison is a sensitive being, others that he is put in there for punishment. Some grudge him every gleam of comfort or alleviation of misery to which his situation is susceptible. To others, every little privation, every little unpleasant feeling, every unaccustomed circumstance, every necessary point of coercive discipline presents matter for a charge of inhumanity. To American transportation, the following is a summary of his objections. 1. It was unequal. A man who had money might buy off the servitude. Again, with regard to banishment, it was unequal. Some would have been glad to go by choice, others would rather die. 2. It was unexemplary. What the convict suffered, be it much or little, was unknown. 3. It was unfrugal. It occasioned great waste of life in the mode and of money in the expenses of conveyance. 4. It did answer in some degree in disabling the offender from doing further mischief. Yet it has always been easier for a man to return from transportation than to escape from prison. 5. It answered every now and then the purposes of reformation pretty well, but not so well upon the whole under the variable and uncertain direction of a private master, whose object was his own profit, as it might be expected to answer under regulations concerted by the united wisdom of the nation. In these objections to American transportation, the colonists will recognize familiar sounds, the chief elements of the arguments, in times both remote and recent, against the practice of transportation. The worst class of criminals were often found in London, before their first sentence had expired. Many suffered capitally for this offence. Before the practice of contracting with shippers, political offenders preferred the continent of Europe to the hardships of America. It was made felony, without benefit of clergy, for rebels under sentence of transportation to reside either in France or Spain, and the inhuman penalty was denounced against their friends who might correspond with them in any form. When the Crown carried out the sentence, the offender's return was still capital, and though unpopular, the guilty rarely escaped the penalty on conviction. When this colony was established, the chief towns of Great Britain were haunted by innumerable thieves, who were organized for the purposes of robbery. In London, armed men assailed passengers by night and even by day. The arrest of robbers was accompanied with considerable danger, and it was not until towards the close of the 18th century that the military guards ceased to attend executions. A vast multitude of persons had degenerated into a robber caste. They lodged under the arches of bridges or nestled in nooks or corners, wherever they could burrow. The districts of the city occupied by the better class of society seemed but a small portion of the metropolis. Like islands in a sea of vice and destitution, there were numerous places of savage amusement and small gambling houses, and young men of family, hanging loose on the world, not unfrequently became amateur adventurers in crime. The populace felt no aversion to a highwayman of spirit. The pursuit of criminals became a voluntary and profitable calling, and offenders against the laws were encouraged and sheltered, until they were ripe for the executioner. Every part of London was the scene of executions. Malefactors were hung in chains on every common and wayside. The populace treated the culprit with cheers or hisses, according to their view of his crime. Many wore a white cockade in their hats in token of their innocence when they were carried in procession to the scaffold. To compensate for the feebleness of the police and the popular sympathy with crime, the Crown paid £40 for each capital conviction. In 1796, a conspiracy was developed, which led to the legal slaughter of 70 persons, at a profit to the conspirators of £2,800. In 1818, the legislature reluctantly terminated this traffic in blood. Thus, after much discussion, the plan of a new penal settlement was finally preferred, denominated in the official correspondence the Improved Colony of New South Wales. In dedicating his work to Thomas Townsend, Viscount Sydney, Collins ascribes the establishment of the colony to that nobleman. To your patriotism, he writes, the plan presented a prospect of political and commercial advantages. The facts recorded, he alleges, evinced with how much wisdom the measure was suggested and conducted, with what beneficial effects its progress had been attended, and what future benefits the parent country might with confidence anticipate. It was expected by Collins that the colony would prove a valuable nursery for soldiers and seamen. The territorial seal provided by the Crown stamped on the instruments of government the primary design. On the obverse, the royal arms and title, but on the reverse, convicts were represented landing, received by industry, who, surrounded by her attributes, a bale of merchandise, a pickaxe and shovel, released them from their fetters and pointed them to oxen ploughing. The legend was appropriate, sic fortis Etruria crevit. He who lives among a civilized people may estimate the labor by which society has been brought into such a state by reading in the annals of Botany Bay the account of a whole nation exerting itself to floor the government house. Yet time shall come when some Botany Bay Tacitus shall record the crimes of an emperor lineally descended from a London pickpocket. End of chapter 54. Transportation, section 3.